In 2022, Fidelity quietly published a study on which accounts in their system had the highest returns. The answer surprised many people. The top-performing accounts belonged to investors who had either forgotten they had the account or were dead. No rebalancing, no market timing, no decisions at all. Just a machine running in the background, untouched. Here's the gap that creates. Most people treating a retirement account like an active project, checking it, adjusting it, responding to it, end up with less than the people who forgot it existed, significantly less. And that gap isn't explained by income, or contribution amount, or even the funds they chose. It comes down to one thing: whether the machine was allowed to run. So why does the same $500 a month produce completely different outcomes depending on who's holding the account? That question is what this video is about, because the mechanism behind it isn't complicated. It's just invisible until someone shows you the math. And once you see it, you'll understand why 4.7% of Americans retire with $1 million, and only 1.8% ever reach $2 million. It's not bad luck. It's not the wrong funds. It's that nobody showed them how the gap actually works. My name is Alex, and if you've ever done everything right, contributed consistently, left it alone, watched the balance grow, and still wondered whether it's actually going to be enough, stay with me, because I'm going to show you exactly how a standard $500 monthly contribution compounds into $2 million by retirement, and what silently drains that number for most people before they ever get there. Once you understand how these two forces work against each other, you won't look at your account the same way. You'll know what to protect, and you'll know what to ignore. The gap between those who reach $2 million and those who don't rarely comes down to how much they put in. It comes down to understanding what's actually happening inside the account. The gap nobody talks about. Here is something worth sitting with for a moment. The median 401k balance, that's your employer retirement account, for someone in their 40s right now is around $87,000. That number is not catastrophic. It is not zero. For a lot of people, it actually represents years of disciplined saving, automatic contributions, and not touching it during the crashes. And yet it is barely a starting point for what retirement actually costs. Here is why that matters. Workers themselves, when surveyed this year, estimated they would need a median of $875,000 to retire comfortably. Not $1 million, not $2 million. Just a reasonable, modest retirement, $875,000. The average person in their 40s has $87,000. That is roughly 10 cents on the dollar of what they believe they need. And this is not a story about people who failed to save. These are people with 401k balance, people who showed up, enrolled, and contributed, people who did what they were told. The gap between where they are and where they need to be is not a discipline problem. It is an information problem. Specifically, it is the problem of never being shown how the three levers actually work together. Now you might be thinking, I have more than $87,000 saved. And maybe you do, but the pattern holds at almost every balance level. The person with $150,000 feels better than the person with $87,000. But both of them are operating the same machine without reading the manual. The starting balance matters less than most people assume. What matters is understanding what drives the final number. Let me give you a concrete example of how fast this can go wrong. Take someone like Brian. He is 41, works in supply chain management, earns around $78,000 a year, and has about $90,000 in his 401k. By most measures, Brian is doing fine. He contributes $500 a month. His employer offers a match. He picked a target date fund when he signed up a decade ago, and has not touched it since. On the surface, that is exactly what the advice says to do. But Brian has never actually run the math on what his account will produce at 65. He assumes, loosely, that he will be okay. He has heard the market averages around 10% over the long run. He vaguely knows compound interest is powerful, but he has never seen his specific numbers, with his specific inputs, laid out from start to finish. When you run them, the result is either a relief or a wake-up call, depending entirely on whether he understands the three levers driving the outcome. Because here is what changes everything. A retirement account does not grow through one mechanism. It grows through three simultaneous ones. Brian's personal contribution is only the first. His employer match, money he never personally deposited, is the second. And the starting balance he already has, compounding completely on its own for the next 25 years, is the third. Most people only think about the first one. They calculate how much they contribute and assume the rest is just interest. But the other two levers are doing as much work, sometimes more, than anything Brian puts in himself. This is why two people with identical salaries and identical monthly contributions can end up with completely different balances at retirement. One of them understood the machine, the other one only understood one part of it. And this is also why the headline number, $500 a month growing to $2 million, is not a fantasy. It is just arithmetic. Specifically, it is the arithmetic of three levers compounding over 25 years, working simultaneously in the same account. That is what we are going to look at now. Not in theory, with actual numbers broken down lever by lever, so you can see exactly where $2 million comes from and how much of it you personally had to put in. The three-lever machine. Most people think of compound interest as a single force. One input, one output. You put money in and it grows. But that framing is missing most of the picture. And the part it misses is where most of the $2 million actually comes from. Let's stay with Brian. 41 years old, supply chain manager, $90,000 already in his 401k, contributing $500 a month. His employer offers the most common match structure in the US right now, 50 cents on every dollar he contributes, up to 6% of his salary. And the S&P 500, which a low-cost index fund tracks closely, has returned an average of 10.4% annually over the last 30 years. That is the number we will use, not a projection. A historical average through recessions, crashes, recoveries, and everything in between. Now let's run the three levers one at a time. Lever 1 is Brian's personal contribution, $500 a month, every month, for 25 years at 10.4%. That becomes approximately $648,000 at retirement. He personally put in $150,000. The other $498,000 is compounding. Time did that, not Brian. Lever 2 is the employer match. This is the one most people underestimate because it does not feel like their money. But it is. Brian earns $78,000 a year. His employer matches 50 cents per dollar up to 6% of his salary. That works out to roughly $234 added to his account every month. Money Brian never had to earn, never had to budget for, never had to think about. $234 a month for 25 years at the same 10.4% return becomes approximately $305,000. Brian contributed zero of that. Every dollar came from his employer, and then compounding took over. Lever 3 is the starting balance. Brian already has $90,000 sitting in his account today. He does not need to touch it. He does not need to add to it. He just needs to leave it alone for 25 years. At 10.4%, that $90,000 compounds on its own into approximately $1,063,000 at retirement. Now add all three together, $648,000 plus $305,000 plus $1,063,000. That is just over $2 million. Brian personally contributed $150,000 of that. The machine returned more than 13 times what he put in. That is the part worth pausing on, not the final number, the ratio. Brian did not grind his way to $2 million. He set up three levers that worked simultaneously for 25 years and got out of the way. The contribution mattered, but it was the smallest force in the room. And here's what I find genuinely remarkable about this. Lever 3, the starting balance compounding on its own, ends up producing more than half the final number. More than Brian's own contributions, more than his employer's free money. Just $90,000 already in the account, left completely alone. That is not a trick of the math. That is what 25 years of uninterrupted compounding actually looks like when you let it run. Now, you might be wondering why more people do not end up here if the math is this straightforward. The answer is not that the system is broken. The math works exactly as described. What breaks the outcome is everything that happens around the math, the decisions people make while the machine is supposed to be running. Two forces quietly drain this result for the majority of people. Not market crashes, not bad luck. Things that are entirely within your control and rarely visible until someone points them out. The first one operates silently, compounds against you every single year, and never once appears on your monthly statement. The silent tax. Nobody hands you a bill for this one. That is what makes it so effective. When most people compare investment funds, they look at performance history. Maybe they glance at the name, the rating, the general category. What almost nobody reads carefully is the expense ratio, the annual fee the fund charges, expressed as a small percentage of your total balance. And the reason nobody reads it carefully is that it looks irrelevant. The difference between a low-cost index fund and a typical actively managed fund is usually somewhere around 0.5% to 1% per year, a fraction of a fraction. It does not feel like a decision worth agonizing over. But that fraction compounds, and when it compounds against you over 25 years, it does not stay small. Let's put Brian's numbers on it. His account is on track for just over $2 million using a low-cost index fund, something like VOO at 0.03% annually, or FXAIX at 0.015%. Those fees are essentially invisible. On a $100,000 balance, VOO costs Brian $30 a year. That is not a rounding error. That is genuinely nothing. Now swap that fund for a typical actively managed fund. The average expense ratio for actively managed U.S. equity funds currently sits around 0.65% annually. The difference between 0.03 and 0.65 is 0.62% per year. Still sounds small. Run it forward 25 years on Brian's account, and that difference costs him approximately $190,000 in final balance. $190,000. Quietly redirected, never flagged, never appearing as a line item on his statement, just subtracted from the fund's value each year before Brian ever sees a number. That is not a fee. That is a compounding drain running in the opposite direction to everything Brian is trying to build. Here is where it gets harder to justify. You might assume that actively managed funds earn that fee by beating the market. That is the pitch. A professional manager, making smart decisions, generating better returns than a passive index. And if that were true, the higher fee might make sense. But the data is not kind to that argument. According to S&P's most recent scorecard, over 10 years, more than 90% of actively managed U.S. equity funds underperformed the S&P 500. Not a few, not half, more than 90%. So the structure being offered to Brian and to most people is this: pay a higher annual fee, accept a statistically worse expected outcome, and do so invisibly, automatically every single year for 25 years. And the reason that structure exists is not complicated. Follow the incentives. Actively managed funds generate significantly more revenue for the institutions selling them. A financial professional recommending a fund with a 0.65% expense ratio earns more than one recommending VOO. That is not a conspiracy. That is just how the incentive is designed. The advice follows the fee, not the other way around. Now, I want to be fair here. Not every financial advisor is steering people into bad funds. Some actively managed funds do outperform in specific periods. And there are situations where the right actively managed fund makes sense. But as a default position, for someone like Brian running a 25-year compounding machine, the math says low-cost index fund every time. 90+% of the time, that is the better bet. The fix, by the way, is one of the simplest moves in this entire video. Check the expense ratio on every fund in your 401k. If it is above 0.2%, you probably have a better option sitting in the same plan. Most 401k menus include at least one low-cost index fund. You just have to know to look for it. $190,000 is the cost of not looking, but the fee drag is only the first leap. The second one is harder to fix, because it does not come from the fund. It comes from you. The behavior tax. The fee drag is a structural problem. You fix it once, and it stays fixed. This one is different, because it resets every time the market does something uncomfortable. Dalbar has been tracking investor behavior for decades. Every year, they compare what the S&P 500 actually returned against what the average equity investor actually received, not what the fund returned, what the investor walked away with after every buy, sell, and timing decision they made along the way. Over the most recent 20-year period in their data, the S&P 500 returned 10.35% annually. The average equity investor returned 9.24%. That gap, 1.1% per year, does not come from bad funds or high fees. It comes entirely from behavior, from decisions made at the wrong moment, for entirely understandable reasons. 1.1% sounds forgivable. On Brian's account, running the full 25 years, it is not. That behavioral gap quietly removes approximately $280,000 from his final balance, not from a crash, not from a bad fund, from the accumulated cost of human reactions to a market that was always going to recover. And the data shows exactly when those reactions happen. The average holding period for an equity fund currently sits at 4.79 years. That means the average investor holds a fund for less than 5 years before making a change, switching funds, moving to cash, waiting for things to calm down. In a machine designed to run for 25 years, the average person is turning it off and restarting it every 5. The compounding never gets a chance to build the curve it needs. Let me show you what this looks like with a real sequence of events. Consider someone like Rachel. She's a 43-year-old hospital administrator with $380,000 invested in a low-cost index fund. It is 2008. The market drops 38%. Her balance falls from $380,000 to somewhere around $236,000. She watches it happen over several months. She reads the headlines. She talks to colleagues who are moving to cash. And in February 2009, she decides she has seen enough. She sells everything and moves into a money market account to wait for things to stabilize. 1 month later, in March 2009, the market hit its bottom and began to recover. By the end of 2009, it had rebounded more than 60% from that low. Rachel does not see any of that. She is sitting in cash, waiting for a signal that it is safe to get back in. That signal never feels obvious enough. She finally re-enters in January 2010, after the recovery is already well underway. The cost of that decision, 11 months out of the market, is $125,000 in immediate lost gains. That number alone is significant, but it is not the real cost. Because Rachel did not just miss a recovery, she permanently interrupted a compounding sequence. That $125,000, had it stayed invested and continued compounding for the following 2 decades, would have grown to over $800,000. The market did not take that from her. The decision did. And here is the part that makes this difficult to argue against in the moment. Rachel's decision felt rational. Every instinct she had, protect what is left, wait for clarity, get back in when it is safer, was a completely normal human response to a genuinely frightening situation. The problem is not that she panicked. The problem is that the machine she was running does not respond well to being switched off, even once, even briefly, even for the most reasonable-sounding reasons. This is why the behavior tax is harder to fix than the fee drag. You cannot automate your way around it completely. You have to understand it well enough to sit with the discomfort and do nothing, which is genuinely harder than it sounds. So, how do you actually protect Brian's machine from both of these forces and make sure it reaches the number it is supposed to reach? The $2 million blueprint. There is a pattern that shows up consistently in the accounts that actually reach $2 million. It is not aggressive investing. It is not perfect timing. It is not a higher income than everyone else. It is a much more boring combination. The right setup, done once, and then almost no decisions after that. Multimillionaire retirement accounts are not built by people who are smarter about the market. They are built by people who have made fewer moves than everyone else. The Fidelity study from the intro was not a coincidence. The forgotten accounts outperformed because nobody was touching them. Every intervention, every reallocation, every pause, every tactical move costs something. Sometimes a little. Sometimes, as Rachel's story showed, everything. So the blueprint is not complicated, but every step matters, and skipping any one of them changes the outcome in ways that are hard to recover from later. Step 1. Pick the right fund and automate the contribution today, not next month, not after the market settles. Today. The 2 best options currently available for most investors are VOO, which tracks the S&P 500 at an expense ratio of 0.03%, and FXAIX, which does the same at 0.015%. Both are available in most 401k plans. Both have essentially zero fee drag, and both remove the single most common source of underperformance, the temptation to pick something more interesting. Set the $500 monthly transfer to happen automatically on the same date every month, regardless of what the market is doing. This is not just a convenience feature. It is a behavioral protection. When the contribution is automatic, there is no decision to make during a downturn. The money moves, the shares are purchased, and the machine keeps running. Automating the contribution removes the moment where fear can interrupt the process. Now, here is a number worth internalizing. Every single month of delay at this stage, 1 month of waiting, watching, or hesitating, costs approximately $3,800 in final compounding over 25 years at 10.4%. Not because the contribution is large, because the compounding that would have started this month never starts. That time cannot be recovered. Step 2. Capture the full employer match. Every dollar of it. The most common match structure currently offered by U.S. employers is 50 cents on every dollar contributed, up to 6% of salary. On Brian's $78,000 salary, fully capturing that match adds $234 to his account every month. Over 25 years at 10.4%, that becomes approximately $305,000, none of which Brian personally contributed. Leaving any part of that match uncaptured is not a neutral decision. It is voluntarily removing one of the 3 levers from the machine. You're handing back free money that was already yours, and then losing every dollar of compounding it would have generated for the next 2 decades. There is almost no financial decision with a worse return than this one. Contribute at least enough to get the full match. Everything else is secondary to that. Step 3. Open the app less. This sounds like advice. It is actually a mechanism. Every time you open the account during a period of market stress, you are creating a decision point that did not need to exist. The account does not require your input to function. The contributions are automated. The fund is chosen. The machine is running. Checking it does not help it. It only creates opportunities for the behavior tax to take effect. A practical version of this. Set a calendar reminder to review your account twice a year. Not monthly, not weekly, twice. Once to confirm contributions are still flowing correctly, and once to check that nothing structural has changed in your plan. That is all the account needs from you. Everything beyond that is noise that costs money. Brian's machine, set up this way, reaches just over $2 million at 65. He contributed $150,000 personally. The rest came from the match, the starting balance, and 25 years of uninterrupted compounding. The blueprint is not the exciting part of this story. The next is, because what the numbers reveal about how retirement wealth actually gets built is not what most people were taught to believe. The quiet machine. Here's what this video actually showed you. $2 million is not the reward for working harder than everyone else. It is the output of a machine that most people were never shown how to build, and never told how easy it is to break. 3 things determine whether that machine reaches the number or falls short. Time in the market, not timing the market. Fees that compound for you instead of against you. And the discipline to do nothing when every instinct says to act. The next time your balance drops during a bad week, notice what you feel. That feeling, the urge to move, adjust, protect, is exactly where most retirement wealth disappears. Not in the crash, in response to it. And here's the question worth sitting with now. This video looked at one income stream, one account, one $500 monthly contribution. Brian's machine runs on a single lever that he controls. But what happens when you add a second one? What happens when a rental property, a side business, or a taxable brokerage account starts compounding alongside the 401k? If this gave you a clearer picture of how the machine works, share it with someone who needs to see it. The math does not change, but knowing it does.